right. How are you all doing this evening, everyone? So, yeah, welcome to all the newcomers. Please do like the video, of course. Good evening. And also give me a quick sound check if you're able. Sorry for the big wait. I'm not sure what happened. So, things happen, and I'm not going to hold it against the folks at the Duran, Mr. Mercurius, Alexander Mercurius, and Mr. Christofaru, Alex Christofaru. I'm not, things happen. I saw all the comments about how late it was. I was aware of that. This was actually a suggested time. I was told the later the better my time. So, but they're not here yet. I've sent out messages. This was a confirmed time, but things happen, and so hopefully we can get that straightened out either this evening or perhaps we will reschedule. But I wanted to go live with all of you. Please do like the video. Make sure you're hitting that subscribe button. Make sure that you are hitting that notifications bell so you know when I am going live. And please do support my work. You can support it on Patreon. That's the best place to support me. Patreon.com/Dhaiphong. All of the links of where you can support me are in the description. That's the best way to support my work. It all goes to the labor and to all that is required, the equipment, the technology, things I need to get updated, things as well as just all the time that goes into this work, not just this channel, but also my writing. And so it's all very much appreciated. But nevertheless, the Duran is not here as I had hoped. Hopefully we can get that sorted out sometime in the future. But I will continue on. There is a lot to comment on. I definitely wanted to talk about Vladimir Putin's speech tonight. The speech that he gave during the celebration of the accession of the 4 Donbass localities, regions, territories. And it was quite a powerful speech, and there's a lot to comment on. And if there's any more time, I can get into some other topics as well that I find particularly important. So, yeah, I mean, yes, it is very early where Alexander and Alex are based. So maybe that did play a role, but this was agreed upon, at least from my understanding. But, things do happen and the show goes forward. I do have Scott Ritter on for October 4th, which will probably be my next stream. So that should be good. It should be the same time, Eastern time, 9 p.m. So a lot, and then hopefully October 7th, haven't confirmed yet with Mr. Dr. Mohammed Marandi to talk about Iran. I've really wanted to talk about Iran, but feel like I want more of a firsthand account and someone who has been covering Iran a lot more closely than I have over the years. So without any further ado, let's get started, okay? Because I know you have been waiting for a long time for me to come on. So yes, let's talk about this speech, okay? Because there's so much to talk about this. It's an incredible speech. Vladimir Putin addressed the accession of the 4 Donbass territories, regions that are now part of Russia. They voted. I'll show you what the media has been saying about that. The Western corporate media has been saying about that. But these regions voted: Donbass, Lugansk, Zaporozhye, and Kherson. And they all voted 90+% to join the Russian Federation. So that has happened. And that changes the landscape. We covered this in the last stream. So Vladimir Putin's speech is really historic. And generally, I don't cover speeches on this program. Maybe it's something I will do more. But I think there's so many points to this that we need to break down. He really gives what I think is an incredible analysis of the global situation, of the role of the West, the role of the United States in the world, imperialism. He calls out neocolonialism. He talks about the ultimate aims. He directly states that the United States and the West are responsible for the Nord Stream debacle. That was also covered on this program. So there's a lot to go over. But without further ado, let's bring up the speech, okay? So here it is, the signing of treaties on the accession of the Lugansk People's Republics and the Zaporozhye and Kherson regions to Russia. All right, let me zoom in a little bit for you all. So this was this was Putin addressing a ceremony that took place in the Grand Kremlin Palace's St. George Hall. All right, so with that, let's get into this, because this is really important. Really important. I mean, so many points that you don't expect Vladimir Putin or really any world leader at this moment to address in this way, so directly. So he says, citizens of Russia, citizens of the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics, residents of Zaporozhye and Kherson regions, deputies of the State Duma, senators of the Russian Federation. As you know, referendums have been held in the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics, in the Zaporozhye and Kherson regions. The ballots have been counted and the results have been announced. The people have made their unequivocal choice. Today, we will sign treaties on the accession of the Donetsk People's Republic, Lugansk People's Republic, Zaporozhye region, and Kherson region to the Russian Federation. I have no doubt that the Federal Assembly will support the constitutional laws on the accession to Russia and the establishment of 4 new regions, our new constituent entities of the Russian Federation, because this is the will of millions of people. It is undoubtedly their right, an inherent right sealed in Article 1 of the UN Charter, which directly states the principle of equal rights and self-determination of peoples. Now, this is very different from how the Western media, the corporate media, especially in the United States, has portrayed this. I want to show you something. I want to show you how the corporate media, how the New York Times has portrayed this, because I was sent this from someone who's been very supportive of this program and who has helped a lot with the redesign process, with that incredible introduction that you saw, that you waited 20, 30 minutes to listen to. So they sent me this. Let me show you what the New York Times had to say about this. Because to me, it's just a reflection of, and this is a reel found on Instagram. This is the New York Times. This is what they have to say about the referendums and the legitimacy of them. Vladimir Putin is saying it's the right of self-determination of nations, right? Of peoples. Peoples have the right to assert their sovereignty. Well, here's what the New York Times has to say. Oops, where's the volume on this? There it is. Here we go.
І явка така не була масова, і дуже проти цього референдуму, і ніхто не хоче приєднатися до Росії, ніхто. Просто з натиском з цим люди бояться.
So no one wants to join Russia, but yet 90+% of people who voted wanted to join Russia. Now, even if you concede, all right, we don't know how, if you weren't on the ground, even though there were dozens upon dozens of international observers who have not stated any issues with the electoral process, big issues that would cause kind of a question in legitimacy of the vote. But if we were to concede, okay, we can't be 100% sure that so many people voted, but those who did vote, and it was a massive amount of people, right? We're talking about in the millions. A massive amount of people did vote, and they voted to join Russia. So obviously, some people want to join the Russian Federation. So already the New York Times is showing their incredibly biased anti-Russian slant. But it gets worse. It gets worse. Stage managed. They call it stage managed. How insulting to call it stage managed. I mean, that basically means that everyone in the Donbass territories who participated in this we're just actors. And you know what you can do to actors? You can dehumanize them. And then you can continue what Ukraine has been doing for how many years? 8+ years. You continue to shell them. You can continue to kill them, to prevent them from being able to assert their sovereignty, their culture, their way of life. That's what's been happening. Scott Ritter and others have called this not just a proxy war, but Ukraine's campaign in the Donbass as ethnic cleansing. So if you call it stage managed, you're reinforcing that incredibly racist anti-Russia sentiment that has fueled the proxy war since 2014. Now, we're going to get into that in Putin's speech. So let's keep going so we can get back to the speech.
От такий референдум, от таке виявлення. Отак у нас ходять під дулами автомата і заставляють.
Where? Where are the assault rifles? They're talking to someone who's supposedly saying this, but watch, they don't show any images of this. They don't show any video of this.
Підписувати.
The annexation of the captured territories. This is the most brutal violation of the UN Charter. This is an attempt to steal the territory of another state. This is an attempt to erase the norms of international law. This is a very cynical attempt to force the male population in the occupied territory of Ukraine to mobilize into the Russian army.
Says the guy who mobilized hundreds of thousands of people in Ukraine, even the most far-right neo-Nazi elements, to commit ethnic cleansing in the Donbass. That's not at all against international norms, I don't think, or to be servile to the United States and NATO, which have literally dozens of times violated international norms, as he calls them, in the most vile and disgusting ways. So Mr. Zelensky, of course, is just promoting what we already knew he would promote, because not 24 hours after that these referendums were held, what did he do? He tried to fast track Ukraine into NATO, and that failed. That failed dramatically. So let's get back to the speech, though, because we could talk about Zelensky all day and how infantile he is. But, you know, this speech is actually worth listening to. So here we go. It is inherently their right, the Donbass territories, localities, the regions, an inherent right sealed in the Article 1 of UN Charter, which directly states the principle of equal rights and self-determination of peoples. I repeat, it is an inherent right of the people. It is based on a historical affinity, and that is that right that led generations of our predecessors who built and defended Russia for centuries since the period of ancient Rus to victory. Here in Novorossiya, I don't even want to say these names, Pirat Rumyatsev, Alexander Suvorov, and Fyodor Ushakov fought the battles in Catherine the Great and Grigory Potyomkin founded new cities. Our grandfathers and great-grandfathers fought here to the bitter end during the Great Patriotic War. We will always remember the heroes of the Russian Spring, those who refused to accept the neo-Nazi coup d'etat in Ukraine in 2014, all those who died for the right to speak their native language, to preserve their cultures, traditions, and religions, and for the right to live. We remember the soldiers of Donbass, the martyrs of the Odessa Katyn, the victims of inhumane terrorist attacks carried out by the Kiev regime. We commemorate volunteers and militiamen, civilians, children, women, senior citizens, Russians, Ukrainians, people of various nationalities, popular leader of Donetsk, Alexander Zakharchenko, military commanders Arsen Pavlov and Vladimir Zoga, Olga Kochuro, and Alexei Mozgovoy, prosecutor of the Lugansk Republic of Sergei Gorenko, paratrooper. Okay, all the people who have been waging the war of resistance in the Donbass along with their allies. I mean, you know, my Russian, my Ukrainian, not very good. So behind the choice of millions of residents in the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics and the Zaporozhye and Kherson regions is our common destiny and thousand-year history. People have passed this spiritual connection onto their children and grandchildren. Despite all of the trials they have endured, they carry the love of Russia through the years. This is something no one can destroy. That is why older generations and young people, those who were born after the tragic collapse of the Soviet Union, have voted for our unity, for our common future. In 1991, in Boslovzakia, Pushka, representatives of the party elite at that time made a decision to terminate the Soviet Union without asking ordinary citizens what they wanted, and people suddenly found themselves cut off from their homeland. This tore apart and dismembered our national community and triggered a national catastrophe. Just like the government quietly demarcated the borders of the Soviet republics, acting behind the scenes after the 1917 revolution, the last leaders of the Soviet Union, contrary to the direct expression of the will of the majority of people in the referendum of 1991, destroyed our great country and simply made the people in the former republics face this as an accomplished fact. So I want to get into this a bit because, first off, Vladimir Putin really, he kills it with the commemorating the heroes, the resistance, talking about common destiny, talking about unity, talking about, this is just the reality of the situation. Much of Donbass is Russian speaking. Much of Donbass is very much Russian. And that is something that's politically, economically, culturally, socially, all of that very just undeniable. But I do want to say this about Vladimir Putin. As much as Vladimir Putin is such an important world historic figure, he is standing up to imperialism. Russia is standing up to imperialism. But I must say, I disagree with his take here on the Soviet Union. I don't think it could be compared at all. I don't think, for one, I don't think the national question policy in the Soviet Union could be characterized as some kind of equivalent to what unfortunately happened beginning in the late 80s, and then of course in 1990-91 when the Soviet Union was dismembered, really at the decree of those forces within the Communist Party that decided to basically sell the country off, sell the entire Soviet Union off, break it up, destroy it, and throw a lot of those former Soviet republics even into today. We see all of the unrest in places like Tajikistan on their border. You see it also with the former Soviet republics that border Russia, like Latvia, Estonia. You see a lot of unrest there, a lot of poverty, sex trafficking, just the way that the dismemberment of the Soviet Union ruined people's lives. No doubt that was a high crime. And surely, yes, the way that the Communist Party devolved, right, and its role was significantly weakened, we could say that, sure, that was a high crime. The Soviet Union's policy, though, in 1917 onward, especially, let's just say the beginning of the Soviet Union, because that's what he's referencing, Vladimir Putin, was not a high crime. The republics, right, that were absorbed into the Soviet Union had comprised of ethnicities that were in nations that were treated horrendously by the Tsar and during the so-called bourgeois democratic republic from 1905 to 1917. Those contradictions were not resolved, right? So you had a lot of nationalities. This is where Lenin got his theses of oppressed nations from, his theses on self-determination, on the national question from. The Soviet Union tried to implement that theory that so the Soviet Union needed to be united, but that ethnicities and nations needed to have some autonomy. They got that from Lenin. They got that from his work, and they got that just from the material reality of a lot of these ethnic groups being the poorest, being the most oppressed, and being those that the Tsar, that the feudal aristocracy or the semi-feudal aristocracy oppressed the most. Right, and exploited the most, and really sent a lot of these nations, right, had such impoverished economies, right? A lot of them were such a low level of development that some of them were like literally nomadic peoples. And so the Soviet Union, trying to give them autonomy while also absorbing them into the broader socialist political system, gave them both the resources to develop as well as the autonomy to keep being who they were. And I don't think that is a high crime. So I disagree with Putin on that. I thought that wasn't a necessary addition to the speech. There are a few things I didn't find necessary here, but at the same time, the vast majority of this speech is so good that these reflect, I think, more so the complex history and the ways in which Russia today is both an outgrowth, for better and for worse, of the fall of the Soviet Union. So he says, I can admit that they didn't even know what they were doing or what the consequences their actions would have in the end, but it doesn't matter now. There is no Soviet Union anymore. We cannot return to the past. Actually, Russia no longer needs it today. This isn't our ambition. But there is nothing stronger than the determination of millions of people who, by their culture, religions, traditions, and language, consider themselves part of Russia, whose ancestors lived in a single country for centuries. There is nothing stronger than the determination to return to their historical homeland. For 8 long years, people in Donbass were subjected to genocide, shelling and blockades in Kherson and Zaporozhye. A criminal policy was pursued to cultivate hatred for Russia, for everything Russian. Now, too, during the referendums, the Kiev regime threatened school teachers, women who worked in election commissions, and reprisals and death. Kiev threatened millions of people who came to express their will with repression. But the people of Donbass, Zaporozhye, and Kherson weren't broken. They had their say. I want the Kiev authorities and their true leaders in the West to hear me now, and I want everyone to remember this. The people living in Lugansk and Donetsk and Kherson and Zaporozhye have become our citizens forever. The Western media, the West, the collective West, the imperialist West, the United States-led imperialist West, they are going absolutely just out of their minds. They are triggered by that. By Vladimir Putin saying that these are citizens forever, they are trying to paint Russia and Putin as some kind of imperialist force that has just taken these regions. Mind you, what has the Russian military been doing? What has Russia been doing? It hasn't been going into these regions and saying we're going to take over and we're going to govern them and we're going to slaughter people. No, it's been fighting with militias in a very concentrated, in a very tempered manner. It's been really just standing in solidarity and giving military aid and giving military backing to those forces in Donbass that are waging a war of resistance, right? A war of resistance that's been going on for many years since the coup, and that was sparked by Ukraine, the regime in Ukraine, the coup regime in Ukraine, breaking the Minsk Accords. So by Putin saying that these republics, regions are now, those living there are citizens forever, he is triggering the West and the imperialist West, because really, I mean, this is significant. This is a very strong statement saying, no, we are standing up. We are not, this is it. There is no turning back. We are not there. We can see the writing on the wall. We are in this struggle for the duration. If you want a permanent war, then we will wage permanent resistance. And that to me is very powerful. And I'm not surprised that the West is triggered by this. So Putin continues saying, we call on the Kiev regime to immediately cease fire all hostilities, to end the war unleashed back in 2014 and return to the negotiating table. We are ready for this, as we have said more than once, but the choice of the people in Donetsk, Lugansk, Zaporozhye, and Kherson will not be discussed. The discussion has been made, and Russia will not betray it. Kiev's current authorities should respect their free expression of the people's will. There is no other way. It's the only way to peace. We will defend our land with all the forces and resources we have, and we will do everything we can to ensure the safety of our people. This is the great liberating mission of our nation. We will definitely rebuild the destroyed cities and towns, the residential buildings, schools, hospitals, theaters, and museums. We will restore and develop industrial enterprises, factories, infrastructure, as well as the social security, pension, healthcare, and education systems. We will work to improve the level of security. Together, we will make sure that the citizens in these regions can feel the support of all the people of Russia, of the entire nation, all the republics, territories, and regions of our vast motherland. In other words, that's it. We are done. We are done. There's no playing. You can negotiate. I mean, he left out the fig leaf. And this is very strategic because Russia has since the beginning. Since how long? I mean, we can just go back short-term history before the special military operation, December 2021. Vladimir Putin saying, Russia saying, let's talk, let's negotiate. We can prevent any kind of active hostilities. We can prevent what Russia believed was going to happen, which was an all-out offensive in the Donbass. And of course, Russia was building up forces to begin its special military operation to prevent that. I mean, this is what the special military operation is all about: denazification, demilitarization, because one, there was a proxy war already happening in the Donbass, and it was getting more fierce, and there was concerns it would get even fiercer. And then two, what did the US, the West, NATO, and Ukraine's puppet regime do? It said, absolutely not. We're not going to negotiate. We're not going to talk to you. You're Russia. You're a boogeyman. You're the enemy. You're the adversary. You're the aggressor. All of these Cold War antics and talking points. And that led to Russia saying, all right, well, this is it. Donetsk, Lugansk, you are now sovereign in our eyes. We recognize you after 8 years of trying to negotiate some kind of settlement. No more. We are all in. And this is him saying, we are not just all in, but you can negotiate if you want, but what's done is done. We're not turning back the clock on the referendums. And of course, the United States, NATO, the West, Ukraine's puppet government will never acknowledge this, will never acknowledge these referendums. They already said it. They're never going to. Blinken, everybody is saying in the West, the EU, nope. These territories are always going to be Ukraine puppet regime's territories, not Russia's. So Putin knows this, and Russia knows this. But still, this is strategic. Still put out the fig leaf, show your allies, show China, show the global South that you are actually taking the high road, but also asserting your sovereignty and self-determination like they agree with. And that's a big part of this speech, is it reflects the world historic sentiment everywhere, for the most part, in the non-Western world, in the neo-colonies, in the oppressed nations, and in the rising global South nations that are also charting their own course of destiny and who are also being attacked by the same forces, by the same imperialist forces. So let's continue, okay? Friends and colleagues, today I would like to address our soldiers and officers who are taking part in the special military op, the fighters of Donbass and Novorossiya, those who went to military recruitment offices after receiving a call-up paper under the executive order on partial mobilization, those who did this voluntarily, answering the call of their hearts. I'd like to address their parents, wives, and children, tell them what our people are fighting for, what kind of enemy we are up against, and who is pushing the world into new wars and crises and deriving blood-stained benefits from this tragedy. Our compatriots, our brothers and sisters in Ukraine who are part of the united people, have seen with their own eyes what the ruling class of the so-called West have prepared for humanity as a whole. They have dropped their masks and shown what they are really made of. When the Soviet Union collapsed, the West decided that the world and all of us would permanently accede to its diktats. In 1991, the West thought that Russia would never rise after such shocks and would fall to pieces on its own. This almost happened. We remember the horrible 1990s, hungry, cold, and hopeless. But Russia remained standing, came alive, grew stronger, and occupied its rightful place in the world. Meanwhile, the West continued and continues looking for another chance to strike blow at us, to weaken and break up Russia, which they've always dreamed about, to divide our nation state and set our peoples against each other, to condemn them to poverty and extinction. They cannot rest easy knowing that there is such a great country with this huge territory in the world, with its natural wealth, resources, and people who cannot do someone else's bidding, who cannot and will not do someone else's bidding. So, I mean, this is like the definition of self-determination. This is the definition of anti-imperialism. This is why Vladimir Putin, look, I don't agree. We're going to get into more, because not just a comment about the Soviet Union, but also he's going to make further comments that I don't necessarily personally agree with. But at the same time, the vast majority of this speech is an assertion of self-determination, which is inherently anti-imperialist, because what he is saying is that Russia and all of those forces who are fighting against against NATO, against the coup regime in Ukraine, and what he's saying about Russia, what happened to the Soviet Union what happened to what was the Soviet Union after its collapse, is all an expression of what is happening now. What is happening now is there is a reversal of this subservience. No longer will Russia, right? Where it's October 1st. It's the 73rd anniversary of the People's Republic of China. Mao Zedong said the Chinese people have stood up. Right here, Vladimir Putin is saying the Russian people have stood up. the people of Novorossiya, the people of Donbass, they have stood up. They will not abide by, they will not sit idly by as they are being placed under the threat of economic warfare, of military warfare, and of the just absolutely disgusting conditions that came about. Vladimir Putin said hungry, cold, right, starving. The life expectancy in Russia declined for men by like 8 years in a rapid period of time. It would decline, I think, 1 year for every year after the Soviet Union fell from 1991 to 1999. This was the situation in the Soviet Union. People lost everything overnight. People had nothing overnight. I mean, this was a catastrophe. And so no more. That will never happen again, according to Putin here. The West is ready to cross every line to preserve the neocolonial system, which allows it to live off the world, to plunder it thanks to the domination of the dollar and technology, to collect an actual tribute from humanity, to extract its primary source of unearned prosperity, the rent paid to the hegemon. The preservation of this annuity is their main, real, and absolutely self-serving motivation. This is why total desovereigntization is in their interest. This explains their aggression towards independent states, traditional values, and authentic cultures, their attempts to undermine international integration processes, new global currencies, and technological development centers they cannot control. It is critically important for them to force all countries to surrender their sovereignty to the United States. So right here, directly going after the United States, saying the United States is leading a neo-colonial system. He's right. The United States is leading a neo-colonial system, trying to destroy any possibility of sovereignty, because the sovereignty, self-determination, integration projects like the Belt and Road Initiative, the Eurasian Economic Union, which Russia leads, the Belt and Road Initiative, which China leads, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, BRICS, the BRICS Alliance. I mean, all of these multilateral institutions, not led by the United States and the West, are a threat to the continued dominance of the dollar and all that the dollar represents, the imperialist hegemony of the United States. So let's continue. In certain countries, the ruling elites voluntarily agree to do this, voluntarily agree to become vassals. Others are bribed and intimidated. If this does not work, they destroy entire states, leaving behind humanitarian disasters, devastation, ruins, millions of wrecked and mangled human lives, terrorist enclaves, social disaster zones, protectorates, colonies, and semi-colonies. They don't care. All they care about is their benefit. I want to underscore that, again, that their insatiability and determination to preserve their unfettered dominance are the real causes behind the hybrid war that the collective West is waging against Russia. They do not want us to be free. They want us to be a colony. They do not want equal cooperation. They want to loot. They do not want to see us as a free society. They want a mass of soulless slaves. They see our thought and philosophy as a direct threat. That's why they target our philosophers for assassination. That's a direct reference to Alexander Dugin, which is interesting because in the past, the government largely stayed away from references to Alexander Dugin, but his daughter was assassinated. Our culture and art present a danger to them, so they're trying to ban them. Our development and prosperity are also a threat to them because competition is growing. They do not want or need Russia, but we do. So, I mean, this in particular, right? The ruling elites, he's talking about Europe here, voluntarily agree to be subservient, but then others are bribed and intimidated, mostly probably talking about the global south, but this happens in Europe too, and he gets to that. So they destroy states. This is the United States he's talking about. He's talking about the humanitarian disasters. He's talking about Libya. He's talking about the devastation, the ruin, millions of wrecked and mangled human lives. I mean, Iraq alone, Afghanistan, hello? I mean, this is what he's talking about. He's talking about the hypocrisy of the West, the hypocrisy of the imperialist West led by the United States to lecture Russia in attempt to undermine its sovereignty is just underscoring exactly what it really is. And there is not many world leaders willing to do this. I've heard Xi Jinping talk about imperialism, Bashar al-Assad talk about imperialism, but this is a very direct, this is how you can tell that the escalation in Ukraine, right? This was a red line and it's being crossed, and the rhetoric, the language, the ideology has not necessarily changed, because I think there are many countries that share this opinion. But to go out on the world stage, right, to address the government and do so understanding an international audience would be watching, shows that now is a time not to bide time, not to sit and wait around, but to assert, right, to assert your interests. And that's what Putin is doing here, and Russia is doing. So the West is counting on impunity, on being able to get away with anything. As a matter of fact, this was the case until recently. Strategic security agreements have been trashed. Agreements reached at the highest political level have been declared tall tales. Firm promises not to expand NATO to the east gave way to dirty deception as soon as the former leaders bought into them. Missile defense, intermediate range, and short-range missile treaties have been unilaterally dismantled under far-fetched pretexts. And all we hear is the West is insisting on a rules-based order. Where did that come from anyway? Who has ever seen these rules? Who agreed or approved to them? Listen, this is just a lot of nonsense, utter deceit, double standards, and even triple standards. They must think we're stupid. So where's the lie here? The United States says it's for a rules-based international order. The West says it follows what the United States does, but it's hypocrisy. It's lies. So, oftentimes Vladimir Putin is talked about as this boogeyman, as someone who doesn't have any sense. Does this sound like someone who doesn't have any sense to you? To me, it seems like Putin, and as a reflection of the Russian government, there's a lot of sense going on here. That the rules-based international order that the U.S. claims to lead actually not only doesn't exist, but really is just deception and mythology. The United States rules-based international order is just U.S. hegemony. It's just U.S. domination of the planet. Russia is a great 1,000-year-old power, a whole civilization. It's not going to live by such makeshift false rules, so a complete rejection. It was the so-called West that trampled on the principle of inviolability of borders and is now deciding as its own discretion who has the right to self-determination and who does not, who is unworthy of it. It is clear what their decisions are based on or who gave them the right to decide in the first place. They just assumed it. This is why the choice of the people in Crimea, Sevastopol, Donetsk, Lugansk, Zaporozhye, and Kherson makes them so furiously angry. The West does not have any moral right to weigh in or even utter a word about freedom or democracy. It does not, and it never did. That's 100% correct. What right does the United States and the West even have, given that, the United States has its own oppressed nations, and the West as well. The West, Britain still has colonies, right? They all support Israel, which is essentially a colony, a colonial power in its own right. The United States has its own oppressed nations. We're not even talking about Guam or those so-called territories, Puerto Rico, which is a colony of the United States. But inside of the borders of the United States, you have oppressed nations. You have oppressed indigenous nations, Black people at various points in political history have argued for the right to nationhood because of their status as captured people, enslaved within a territory that was not originally their own. And they were deemed not human and just property, right, to be super exploited. So the United States and the collective West, and Vladimir Putin is going to mention this, doesn't have any right to lecture. It doesn't, because the United States and the West talk all about Ukraine sovereignty, even though they staged the coup in 2014. It was their weapons, their money, staged the coup in 2014. Where was Ukraine's sovereignty then? Why couldn't the United States and the West allow Ukraine's government at that time to just stand as it was? Well, it's because the government at that time was seeking more parity with Russia, along with its relationship with the EU. So that's why it had to go. And there was no talk about sovereignty then. Now it's all about Ukraine's sovereignty. And of course, these republics, these regions with majority Russian-speaking people, the vast majority, if not entirely majority Russian-speaking people, Russian-identified people, Russians, they can't assert their right to be independent of a regime that doesn't want to see them exist anymore. So that's the logic of democracy and freedom. of the United States and the West. Western elite not only deny national sovereignty and international law, their hegemony has pronounced features of totalitarianism, despotism, and apartheid. They brazenly divide the world into their vassals, the so-called civilized countries, and all the rest, who, according to the designs of today's Western racists, should be added to the list of barbarians and savages. False labels like rogue country or authoritarian regime are already available and are used to stigmatize entire nations and states, which is nothing new. There is nothing new in this. Deep down, the Western elites have remained the same colonizers. They discriminate and divide peoples into the top tier and the rest. I mean, this is one of the most impressive parts of Putin's speech. And it's one of the most impressive parts of Putin's speech because, a lot of people like to think of Vladimir Putin as this kind of like singular figure. There's a lot of liberals and even some on the left who see him as entirely social conservative, entirely with like the Russian Orthodox and look, the Russian Orthodoxy, etc., some more traditional elements of Russian society. And look, Vladimir Putin certainly, and we'll see this in the future text of this speech, yes, he does embrace and does talk about those things to some degree. But at the same time, in describing the Western imperialist order, the US-led Western imperialist order in this way, he's also acknowledging a fundamental premise of imperialism, racism. He is literally talking about the dehumanization of entire peoples and nations for the aims of imperialism. That is the purpose of racism. And he says deep down, the Western elites are still the same colonizers, in that nothing more could be true. Not only because literally the West still has colonies and still treats many countries like neo-colonies. Just look at what's happening in Haiti right now. Haiti, there's millions of people rising up, and the United States is literally gearing up to squash those protests. Already doing so, but gearing up to do so again and again and again. France controlling the currencies of many African countries that formerly called its colonies. So there are examples after examples of this. And Vladimir Putin is saying he identifies, and Russia identifies, as the target of this same racism, this same racist imperialist system, which requires this kind of dehumanization to justify the absolutely horrific policies that come with imperial domination. So Putin continues that we've never agreed and will never agree to such political nationalism and racism. What else if not racism is the Russophobia being spread around the world? What if not racism is the West's dogmatic conviction that its civilization and neoliberal culture is an indisputable model for the entire world to follow? You're either with us or against us. It even sounds strange. Western elites are even shifting repentance for their own historical crimes on everyone else, demanding that the citizens of their countries and other peoples confess to things they have nothing to do with at all. For example, the period of colonial conquest. I found this very interesting that that he says this. This is just him acknowledging the projection of the American empire, of the American-led Western imperialist empire, talking about these Western elites shift their repentance on everyone else. And that's true. Everyone else has to pay for the crimes. Everyone who doesn't deserve to pay for these crimes have to basically answer. It is worth reminding the West that it began its colonial policy back in the Middle Ages, followed by the worldwide slave trade, the genocide of Indian tribes in America, the plunder of India and Africa, the wars of England and France against China, as a result of which it was forced to open its ports to the opium trade. What they did was get entire nations hooked on drugs and purposely exterminated entire ethnic groups for the sake of grabbing land and resources, hunting people like animals. This is contrary to human nature, truth, freedom, and justice. Wow. I mean, some people call that woke, right? There's a lot of people say, oh, you can't bring that up. You can't, all that stuff, talk about the legacy. No, Vladimir Putin is bringing that up. Vladimir Putin is bringing that up. Okay. Vladimir Putin is saying that racism is fundamental to neocolonialism and imperialism. Vladimir Putin is saying that that all of this, the colonial policies all the way dating back to the late 15th century, right, the Middle Ages, all the way to this world slave trade, the genocide of indigenous peoples. He's going all in, saying your history, the West, the United States, it is stained. It is completely and irrefutably rooted in this barbarity. And so you have no right to lecture Russia. And so he continues saying, well, we are proud that in the 20th century, our country led the anti-colonial movement, which opened up opportunities for many peoples around the world to make progress, reduce poverty and inequality, and defeat hunger and disease. So to emphasize, one of the reasons for the centuries-old Russophobia, the Western elites' unconcealed animosity toward Russia, is precisely the fact that we did not allow them to rob us during the period of colonial conquest and force the Europeans to trade with us on mutually beneficial terms. This was achieved by creating a strong centralized state in Russia, which grew and got stronger based on the moral values of Orthodox Christianity, Islam, Judaism, and Buddhism, as well as Russian culture and the Russian word that were open to all. There were numerous plans to invade Russia. Such attempts were made during the time of troubles in the 17th century and in the period of ordeals after the 1917 revolution. All of them failed. The West managed to grab hold of Russia's wealth only in the late 20th century, when the state had been destroyed. They called us friends and partners, but they treated us like a colony, using various schemes to pump trillions of dollars out of the country. We remember, we have not forgotten anything. So, Russian history is complex, and this is a very nationalist speech. And so, pre-Soviet era, there were a lot of periods during the Tsar, during the, semi-feudal, there was a semi-feudal character to Russia. And, Lenin called it a prison house of nations. So I wouldn't necessarily describe it as something that was like completely open to all and that everything was just so much better. But there was a fundamental contradiction in the sense that even in this state, Russia was not completely and entirely subservient to imperialism. So he's bringing up the fact that Russia never has been, okay? Never, even when it was attempted, it did not succeed because the future kept bringing new moments of resistance to this, which led to eventually the Soviet Union occurring, the Russian Revolution, and then, of course, all that happened after that. So a few days ago, people in Donetsk, Lugansk, and Kherson, Zaporozhye declared their support for restoring our historical unity. Thank you. Western countries have been saying for centuries that they bring freedom and democracy to other nations. Nothing could be further from the truth. Instead of bringing democracy, they suppressed and exploited. Instead of giving freedom, they enslaved and oppressed. The unipolar world is inherently anti-democratic and unfree. It is false and hypocritical through and through. The United States is the only country in the world that has used nuclear weapons twice, destroying the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan, and they created a precedent. So think about this. Think about what he's saying, okay? He's calling out the United States by name, talking about the United States using nuclear weapons, talking about the hypocrisy of so-called freedom and democracy. This alone, what he's saying here alone is triggering the West. I mean, this is really a powerful statement saying you cannot bully us like you're attempting to do and expect us to play nice all of the time. Russia, for whatever anyone wants to think, right? The NAFO trolls, all of these incredibly reactionary pro-imperialist forces never have an answer to the fact that Russia, since 2001, since Vladimir Putin has come to power, reelected several times in vast majorities, no one ever mentions the fact that Russia has attempted, has done everything it could to prioritize cooperation. Both Russia and China are similar in this way. They try to promote cooperation. They accepted Nord Stream 2. They were suspicious of Germany. They accepted Nord Stream 2 because Russia has done everything it could to maintain good relations with Europe for good reasons, and the United States as well, because Russia never wanted this. Russia did not want enemies, but it was made into one. And now Vladimir Putin is saying, well, we see right through all of this. And you have created a precedent. We understand that the nuclear threat is with you, that the real threat to democracy and freedom is with you. The real threat to self-determination is with you. And we're not going to have it anymore. Not going to have it. So recall that during World War II, the United States and Britain reduced Dresden, Hamburg, Cologne, and many other German cities to rubble. The firebombing of Dresden killed hundreds of thousands. It mutilated them. It was firebombing. It was literally incinerating people. This is what the United States and Britain did. Without the least military necessity. It was done ostentatiously and to repeat without any military necessity. They had one goal, as with the nuclear bombing of Japanese cities, to intimidate our country and the rest of the world. In my book on American exceptionalism in 2019, I talk about the so-called myth of the good war. That's exactly right. Vladimir Putin is spitting history right now, showing that, in fact, the nuclear bombs on Japan were not to end the war. Japan was ready to surrender. Japan was losing badly. What the United States was doing to Japan had already cost such huge economic toll on the country that that Japan was really had no choice but to begin its surrender. But the United States wanted to intimidate the Soviet Union. They did the same in Dresden, Germany. There was no reason at all to firebomb and kill hundreds of thousands of people. But they did it anyway. And then here we go, more history from Putin. The United States left a deep scar in the memory of the people of Korea and Vietnam with their carpet bombings and use of napalm and chemical weapons. It actually continues to occupy Japan, Germany, Japan, the Republic of Korea, and other countries, which they cynically refer to as equals and allies. Look now, what kind of alliance is that? The whole world knows that the top officials in these countries are being spied on, and that their offices and homes are bugged. It is a disgrace for those who do this, and for those who, like slaves, silently and meekly swallow this arrogant behavior. They call the order and threats they make to their vassals Euro-Atlantic solidarity and the creation of biological weapons and the use of human test subjects, including in Ukraine, noble medical research. It is their destructive policies, wars, and plunder that have unleashed today's massive wave of migrants. Millions of people endure hardships and humiliation or die by the thousands trying to reach Europe. So, I mean, more history, talking about the wars, talking about how the United States, how the West, how imperialism is creating humanitarian catastrophes, creating the migration crisis, creating biological testing, nuclear weapons, all of this, destroying countries. He brings up Vietnam and Korea. I mean, these are very sensitive topics. The United States cannot, it really cannot handle this kind of criticism, right? This is amazing. I think it's really important to study. I mean, this is history. This is like a history lesson, and it's a very concise one. So people should understand that Vladimir Putin knows more history than the vast majority of Americans, people in Europe, but for damn sure knows more history than those elites who are causing all of the destruction that he is laying bare in this speech. So he said it continues to occupy Germany, Japan, the Republic of Korea, and other countries, which they cynically refer to as equals. Look now, what kind of alliance is that? The whole world knows that top officials in these countries are being spied on. Oh, I already read that. So they're exporting grain from Ukraine now. What are they taking it under the guise of ensuring the food security of the poorest countries? Where is it going? They're taking to the same They are taking it to the same European countries. Only 5% has been delivered to the poorest countries. More cheating and naked deception again. In effect, the American elite is using the tragedy of these peoples to weaken its rivals, to destroy nation states. This goes for Europe and for the identities of France, Italy, Spain, and other countries with centuries-long histories. Washington demands more and more sanctions against Russia, and the majority of European politicians obediently go along with it. They clearly understand that by pressuring the EU to completely give up Russian energy and other resources, the United States is practically pushing Europe toward deindustrialization in a bid to get its hand on the entire European market. These European elites understand everything. They do, but they prefer to serve the interests of others. This is no longer servility, but direct betrayal of their own peoples. God bless. It is up to them. I mean, here, Putin is essentially mocking. I mean, he's essentially mocking at this point the European Union, and rightfully so, because at some point, the shit hits the fan, right? This is an embarrassment. The EU is um, the EU is just bowing down to the United States, just bowing down, right? That's what it's doing, and it is so focused on serving the US that yes, it has betrayed. I mean, look, did I ever think that these European capitalist governments really were loyal to the citizenry, right? I mean, we're talking about a Europe is still imperialist. It's still very much about class rule. But at the same time, there is there's an extremity to this. There's just an extreme degree of blowback to this that at this point it's just pathetic. And Putin is exposing this. He's exposing how pathetic Europe is by literally giving up Russian energy to fight the US's proxy war, which will, I mean, one of the reasons, and we should explain this, the reason why Putin says that Europe is going to need to deindustrialize is because with the high cost of energy, the rationing, all industry, the military industrial complex, every kind of the creation of anything, commodities, steel, farming, anything at all requires a great deal of energy. You need power. So in order to function as an economy, any economy, but especially a capitalist economy that is trying to maintain the ill-gotten wealth that it stole from colonies, neo-colonies, the rest of the world, you need energy to power that. And the EU has given that up. And with Nord Stream 1 and 2 disasters, with that sabotage that looks like NATO and the US done it, well, what do you think? I mean, what do you think is going to happen? Do you think businesses can pay huge bills, right? The very premise of capitalism is to reduce and lower all costs. This includes constant capital, the materials that you need for production, and also variable capital, that which you exploit, which is primarily labor. Labor is your variable capital. It's that which you purchase in order to extract incredible profits from, and you want to keep all the other costs low. Well, here you have a glut of these prices that no one can pay. You saw bills on Twitter, 10,000 euro, right? Some small businesses are paying for a month. You think you can pay that and still make profits and still keep your lights on? No. And we already see the rationing that's going on. We see all that is happening to just devastate Europe, and it's pathetic. And so God bless, says Putin. It's up to them. So, but the Anglo-Saxons, Putin says, believe sanctions are no longer good enough, and now they have turned to subversion. It seems incredible, but it is a fact. By causing explosions on Nord Stream's international gas pipelines passing along the bottom of the Baltic Sea, they actually have embarked on the destruction of Europe's entire energy infrastructure. It is clear to everyone who stands to gain. Those who benefit are responsible, of course. So Putin is blaming. He is blaming the West. He's blaming NATO. He's blaming the US for the Nord Stream 1 and 2 disasters. Now, we don't have the investigation yet. We can't say they did it. But of course, we went over this on this program. Check it out in the last stream. I talked about the paper trail, talked about the suspicious, what the AP, the Associated Press, is calling baseless accusations, right? These baseless conspiracy theories. Well, conspiracies don't necessarily mean lies. Conspiracy means that there is a plot to do something, or that a plot was pursued in order to enact some kind of outcome. And we have a lot of at least circumstantial evidence that warrants, hey, we should investigate that matter. We should investigate the US, NATO. We should investigate their role in all of this. But you know, of course, they're going to try to use their dominance to stop that. The dictates of the US are backed up by crude force on the law of the fist. Sometimes it is beautifully wrapped up Sometimes there's no wrapping at all, but the gist is the same, the law of the fist. Hence the deployment and maintenance of hundreds of military bases in all corners of the world. NATO expansion and attempts to cobble together new military alliances such as AUKUS and the like. Much is being done to create a Washington-Seoul, Tokyo military political chain. All states that possess and aspire to genuine strategic sovereignty and are capable of challenging Western hegemony are automatically declared enemies. So as you can see here, he's talking about China, because that's really summing up the growing military encirclement of China and likening the two. This is the obvious solidarity that these two countries share. These are principles that underlie US and NATO military doctrines that require total domination. Western elites are presenting their neo-colonialist plans with the same hypocrisy, claiming peaceful intentions, talking about some kind of deterrence. This evasive word migrates from one strategy to another, but really means one thing: undermining any and all sovereign centers of power. We have already heard about deterrence of Russia, China, and Iran. I believe next in line are other countries of Asia, Latin America, Africa, and the Middle East, as well as the current U.S. partners and allies. After all, we know when they are displeased, they introduce sanctions against their allies as well, against this or that bank or company. That is their practice, and they will expand it. They have everything in their sights, including our next door neighbors, the CIS countries. So basically those countries in Central Asia. At the same time, the West has already been engaged in wishful thinking for a long time. In launching the sanctions blitzkrieg against Russia, for example, they thought that they could once again line up the whole world at their command. As it turns out, however, such a bright prospect does not excite everyone, other than complete political masochists and admirers of other unconventional forms of international relations. Most refuse to snap a salute and instead choose the sensible path of cooperation with Russia. So here you go. He's saying there is resistance. There's resistance to this. This is not something that all countries are bowing down to. He's the masochists, the EU, European countries, so-called allies of the United States. But most countries are not playing ball, and that the West did not expect such subordination. They simply got used to acting according to a template to grab whatever they please by blackmail, bribery, intimidation, and convince themselves that these methods would work forever, as if they had fossilized the past. Such self-confidence is a direct product of not only the notorious concept of exceptionalism, although it never ceases to amaze, but also of the real information hunger in the West. The truth has been drowned in an ocean of myths, illusions, and fakes, using extremely aggressive propaganda, lying like Goebbels. The more unbelievable the lie, the quicker people will believe it. That is how they operate according to this principle. But people cannot be fed with printed dollars and euros. You can't feed them with pieces of paper, and the virtual, inflated capitalization of Western social media companies can't heat their homes. Everything I am saying is important, and what I just said is no less so. You can't feed anyone with paper. You need food. You can't heat anyone's home without with these inflated capitalizations. You need energy. I mean, this is look, Vladimir Putin is not a communist, and I think we need to get real about that. Vladimir Putin is not a communist, but Vladimir Putin is very much so someone who understands. I mean, look, Vladimir Putin grew up in the Soviet Union. There's no doubt that he has studied Marxism, regardless of whether he embraces all or any of its theoretical principles, premises, etc. But what he says here, okay, you cannot be fed with printed dollars and euros. You cannot feed them with pieces of paper. You need food. That's understanding historical materialism, that it is the material conditions that really do drive society, drive ideology, drive everything. It's the material base of society, and you cannot stuff dollars and euros down people's throats, especially in a time where everything costs so much. The exact opposite actually happens. People they're losing their wages, they're losing their livelihoods, their standards of living. A recession is on the way. You need energy, you need food in order to just have a stable economy, even one based on exploitation like capitalism is. You still need that material base. You need that to have any semblance of stability. But that is going away. And that is what Putin is saying. He's saying, you need us, really. You need what we have. But yet you are forcing the masses of people to suffer. That is why politicians in Europe, he says, have to convince their fellow citizens to eat less, take a shower less, and dress warmer at home. And those who start asking fair questions like, why is that, in fact, are immediately declared enemies, extremists, and radicals. They point back at Russia and say, this is the source of all of your troubles. More lies. I want to make a special note of the fact that there's every reason to believe that the Western elites are not going to look for constructive ways out of the global food and energy crisis that they and they alone are to blame for as a result of their long-term policy dating back long before a special military operation in Ukraine in Donbass. They had no intention of solving problems of injustice and inequality. I'm afraid they would rather use their other formulas they are more comfortable with. And here it is important, another history lesson from Vladimir Putin. This is a good one. It is important to recall that the West bailed itself out of its 20th century challenges with World War I. Remember, beginning in the 1870s, there was a decline in the rate of profit. There was a volatile economic system. There was a recession, and then there was a difficult recovery. And World War I helped bail them out of that, essentially. Then profits from World War II, after the Great Depression occurred, helped the United States finally overcome this and become the largest world economy and impose on the planet the power of the dollar as a global reserve currency, the Bretton Woods institutions. In the 1980s crisis, things came to a head. In the 80s again, the West emerged from it unscathed, largely by appropriating the inheritance and resources collapsed from the collapsed and defunct Soviet Union. That's a fact. I mean, he just summarized more than 100 years of history in a few sentences. That's impressive. You have to give Vladimir Putin his dues. But what's important here as well is to note that he is foreshadowing. He is saying, and he's saying it here, in order to free itself from the latest web of challenges, they need to dismantle Russia as well as other states, China, Iran, to choose a sovereign path to development at all costs and be able to plunder nations further their wealth and use it to patch their holes. If this does not happen, I cannot rule out that they will trigger collapse of the entire system and blame everything on that, or God forbid, decide to use the old formula of economic growth through war. So he is literally saying, he is warning, he is foreshadowing, and this is 100% true. This is what I have been trying to say on this channel. This is what many people have been trying to say on the anti-imperialist left, is that there is a historical continuity here. Okay, the historical continuity is capitalism and imperialism. Western capitalism and imperialism always uses war to get itself out of its own crises. It is a principal strategy for this. Expand markets, usurp markets, absorb more markets, dominate in order to take the wealth of others so that you can bolster the profits of those who have collapsed the economy because of the inherently contradictory character of exploitation under capitalism. War is principal to ameliorating that temporarily, but there's always more crises and always more wars to be waged. And so he's saying you have World War I, World War II, and now you have World War III, or what we could call a new Cold War, a great power confrontation. He's talking about how the United States and the West are very much capable, because of their histories, of doing what they're doing right now and foreshadowing, and we should be foreshadowing to, he says, God forbid, we don't know if this will be the case, but it's a possibility that if the United States if the imperialist system doesn't get what it wants, it will try to take it by force. And so, I mean, we need to take this seriously, but that history lesson is one that most of the Western left, most of the populations in the United States and the West just do not understand. And it's our job to make them aware. And if we have to use Putin's speech to do that, we should be using Putin's speech to do that. Russia is aware of its responsibility to the international community, will make every effort to make sure cooler heads prevail. The current neocolonial model is ultimately doomed. This much is obvious, but I repeat, its real masters will cling to it to the end. They simply have nothing to offer the world except to maintain the same system of plundering and racketeering. They do not give a damn about the natural right of billions of people, the majority of humanity, to freedom and justice, the right to determine their own future. They have already moved on to the radical denial of moral, religious, and family values. So here's where I would think this is, I get it. He's appealing to the whole country, to certain forces. I get it, but here we go. Let's answer some very simple questions for ourselves. I like to return to what I said, and I want to address all citizens of the country, not just colleagues that are in the hall, but all citizens of Russia. Do we want to have here in our country, Russia, parent number 1, parent number 2, and parent number 3? They have completely lost it. Instead of mother and father, do we want our schools to impose on children from the earliest days in school perversions that lead to degradation and extinction? Do we want to run into their heads the ideas that certain other genders exist along with women and men and to offer them gender reassignment surgery? Is that what we want for our country and for our children? This is unacceptable to us. We have a different future of our own. So look, I want to address this, and I'm going to spend only a couple minutes on this because to me, this was not something that would be necessary, in my opinion. He's obviously appealing to some of the more conservative elements in Russia, appealing to all of the Russian people. But at the same time, right, I think that, well, there's some in here, right? He doesn't define perversions that lead to degradation and extinction. Not sure what he means by that. But when we talk about gender reassignment surgery, I mean, even Iran, which has its own kind of conservative elements in its society, although far more progressive than a lot of states that practice Islamic law. I mean, I get it. I understand that Russia is at a particular place in its history, that the Soviet Union also went back and forth on these questions, these social questions, what a lot of people call culture wars or identity politics. I don't see it as that. I see these as critical social questions in the class war and the class struggle. And the Soviet Union was very progressive at times, regressive at times. The early mid 20th century, come on. We're talking about a very backward period. And the Soviet Union was very forward thinking on a lot of these things. But here, there are a lot of countries that stand with Russia that don't have these ideas, that don't make this a priority. I get it that a lot of this stuff is weaponized by imperialism to try to undermine the sovereignty of countries through NGOs and that sort of thing. But I think, for me, it's like, just say that if I'm going to be critical here, because for me, right, this to me feels like appealing in a way that reinforces what I think would be heavy criticisms from the West, which are necessary to trigger. But at the same time, Putin in Russia is sending a message that they are rejecting everything Western. And to me, right, if we're going to be quite honest, what would be more accurate is equivocating things like patriarchy and very socially conservative values with the West and imperialism, because that's actually the truth of the matter. And a lot of that has sprung out of that, right? Some of the, you could say, more modern ways of thinking about gender and all of this, that's a byproduct of the very repressive character of these societies. So, do I think that this is necessary? No. Do I think that this is something that should have been prioritized? No. And do I think it lends Putin and Russia to criticism that I don't think it should care about it? But at the same time, if you're going to win over more people, I don't understand, if you want to appeal to people in the West, to the populations and citizens, then I think this is targeting only a subsection of those folks, and you're leaving out a subsection, especially younger people, younger socialist thinking people generally are thinking about these things not in this way, right? Most people who would be anti-imperialist, the vast majority would, at the very least, consider it none of my business. People should do what they want, whether they're queer, gay, lesbian, what have you, in terms of sexuality across the spectrum. They can do what they want. If I don't identify as that, doesn't matter. They should have the rights. They should not be targeted for any reason. Same thing with transgender people, that kind of thing. And so, for me, this just didn't feel necessary. But at the same time, it's Putin's speech. Putin's the head of state of Russia. And of course, the Russian political situation is much more complex. And there was a huge kind of conservatization in Russia due to the power of the Orthodox Church, which gained a lot more power after the fall of the Soviet Union. So Vladimir Putin ultimately does have to speak to them. He does need their support because without it, politics get really, really muddy under the current political situation. So I get it. I get it because to me, right, this is a contradiction in the speech, but at the same time, there's a lot, there's a lot that can be said about this, and it's a very complex issue. But people might read this in the West, progressives, leftists, those who, there's a lot, of course, that prioritize these questions over imperialism, self-determination, and none of us should be doing that. We should hold the entire class struggle, the entire struggle against the elites of the West as one, and all elements of it as critically important. But at the same time, some people might read that and be very critical. I've already seen email threads that I'm a part of, organizations, collectives, already saying, like, do we have to put out a disclaimer about this because of the reaction? And that's our problem. That's our problem that we need to figure out. It is not the problem, of course, of Vladimir Putin and Russia, which, of course, the people of Russia will have to determine how they view, organize, and institute policies regarding LGBTQ rights and the status of people who are who identify in that milieu and across that spectrum. So let's answer some very simple questions for ourselves. I would like to return to what I said and want to address all citizens of the country, not just the colleagues here in the hall, but all citizens of Russia. Do we want to have here? Oh, I already said that. Sorry about that. Let me repeat that the dictatorship of the Western elites targets all societies, including citizens of Western countries themselves. This is a challenge to all. The complete renunciation of what it means to be human, the overthrow of faith and traditional values, and the suppression of freedom are coming to resemble a religion in reverse, pure Satanism, exposing false messiahs, Jesus Christ said in the Sermon on the Mount. By their fruits ye shall know them. These poisonous fruits are already obvious to people, and not only in our country, but in all countries, including many people in the West itself. The world has entered a period of fundamental revolutionary transformation. New centers of power are emerging. They represent the majority of the international community. They are ready not only to declare their interests, but also to protect them. They see in multipolarity an opportunity to strengthen their sovereignty, which means gaining genuine freedom, historical prospects, and the right to their own independent, creative, and distinctive forms of development. As I've already said, we have many like-minded people in Europe and the US, and we feel and see their support. An essentially emancipatory anti-colonial movement against unipolar hegemony is taking shape in the most diverse countries and societies. Its power will only grow with time. It is this force that will determine our future geopolitical reality. Today, we are fighting for a just and free path, friends. First, for all of ourselves, for Russia, in order to leave the diktat and despotism in the past. I am convinced that countries and peoples understand that a policy based on exceptionalism of whoever it may be and the suppression of other cultures and peoples is inherently criminal, and that we must close the shameful chapter. The ongoing collapse of Western hegemony is irreversible. And I repeat, things will never be the same. The battlefield to which destiny and history have called us in is a battlefield for our people in the great historical Russia, for future generations, our children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. We must protect them against enslavement and monstrous experiments that are designed to cripple their minds and souls. Today, we are fighting so that it would never occur to anyone that Russia, our people, our language, and our culture can be erased from history. Today, we need a consolidated society, and this consolidation can only be based on sovereignty, freedom, creation, and justice. Our values are humanity, mercy, and compassion. And I want to close with the words of a true patriot, Ivan Ilyin. If I consider Russia my motherland, that means I love as a Russian, contemplate, think, sing, speak as Russian, that I believe in the spiritual strength of the Russian people. It is a spirit, my spirit. Its destiny is my destiny. Its suffering is my grief. And its prosperity is my joy. Behind these words stands a glorious spiritual choice, which for more than 1,000 years of Russian statehood has followed many generations of our ancestors. Today we are making this choice. The citizens of Donetsk, Lugansk People's Republics, and the residents of Zaporozhye and Kherson regions have made this choice. They made the choice to be with their people, their motherland, to share in its destiny and be victorious together with it. The truth is with us, and behind us is Russia. So that's the speech. That is the speech. I mean, that speech is incredibly, of course, nationalistic. It comes with it a very heavy nationalist orientation. It is asserting Russia's sovereignty. It has all the contradictions of nationalism, as you saw with the repudiation of the Soviet Union, which I don't agree with that when it comes to the Soviet Union's national policies. I think people in the former Soviet republics were a lot better off, and I think Vladimir Putin knows that. And I think what's ironic about this, and correct me if I'm wrong, folks, but what Vladimir Putin is doing here, what Vladimir Putin and Russia is doing here with Donbass and Zaporozhye and Kherson is kind of in line with the Soviet spirit. It's not 100% the same. We're not talking about a socialist republic anymore. We're not talking about a socialist economy, but we are talking about the respect for self-determination, which kind of the Soviet Union wrote the book on that. If it wasn't for the Soviet Union, I don't know if the UN Charter would have that in it, right? I mean, the Soviet Union really did spearhead what self-determination for nations, oppressed nations, really meant. So you see all the contradictions, of course, but a very powerful speech, that says the West, right, is in the past. It's collapsing. It's going to keep collapsing. There will be the threat of war. And, you know, I think it's important to recognize that these words that Vladimir Putin speaks are a reflection. They are a reflection of the reality of the world situation at this time. A world situation. You have China celebrating the 73rd anniversary of the People's Republic of China, the victorious Chinese Revolution of 1949, on a very similar path, of course, with socialist characteristics, as China would call it, socialism with Chinese characteristics, right? You have China leading the way in integration projects that Vladimir Putin mentioned, leading the way in renewable energy and high technology and public infrastructure, and in championing peace and self-determination, as Russia and Putin are doing here in this speech and have been doing for many, many, many years now, especially since Vladimir Putin came at the helm in Russia. So this is a very important speech. It reflects what is a growing attitude around the world. Vladimir Putin is really expressing what most countries around the world, most peoples around the world are feeling. They're feeling the weight of a collapsing American empire bearing down upon them. And they are ready to embrace a multipolar world where China and Russia lead the way and assist and aid other countries, smaller countries, but no less important countries, like Nicaragua, like Eritrea, like Zimbabwe, like Iran, like Syria, assist all these countries in rebuilding from wars, rebuilding from sanctions, rebuilding from centuries-long histories of imperialist plunder and domination, and rise up to the level of development that is fit for human beings, and then fit for the advancement of the world that has occurred over the last several centuries with this battle between socialism and capitalism that has occurred, and with this battle among economies, geopolitical economies, etc., that this world historic development that is occurring is one where Russia is now in the lead, and Putin is saying very clearly that Russia will be in the lead of this. It will stand with China, with Iran, with all countries of the rest of the world that are seeking an independent path, and that has to be supported unequivocally. Look, do I support all the things that Putin says about transgender folks? And no, I mean, it's a different situation, right? But at the same time, it's not the principal contradiction here. We will see massive changes. We will see an integration of these issues into a more coherent political tradition on the left, on the socialist left, on wherever it may reside, when there is a real political movement in the countries that are spearheading this crumbling empire. When that happens, then we can resolve these issues for ourselves and allow Russia and all other countries of the world to do so the same and learn from each other along that process. Until we get to that point where we have that kind of real multipolarity, real self-determination, where that is respected, then for me, I can surely not agree with Putin on everything, but at the same time, I can't make that the priority when we have what is a brewing and developing possible nuclear exchange because of the aggression of U.S. imperialism. U.S. imperialist aggression, based on its decline and the decline of its so-called Western allies, has no benefits to LGBTQ people, LGBTQ plus. Anyone on that spectrum does not benefit from endless wars. That's how neoliberal identity reductionism turns genuine issues into weapons of the elite, by making us believe that some kind of representation in that arena benefits any of us. It doesn't. What it does is it ensures that countries around the world, like Russia, will view politics, like transgender politics, in the highest echelons of Western society as the enemy, because it will be used, and it has been used, as a weapon of war. That's the reality of the situation. So we have a lot of work to do. We have that work to do, right? We can't be out here saying, Putin, think more like us. It ain't going to happen unless we actually, I mean, I don't think it would ever really happen. But if we're to really learn from each other, if we feel like, yeah, this is a problem, then we have to first build a movement and then a society that is capable of addressing Russian people as equals. I mean, let's all talk about reparations and about, about equality and self-determination and all of these things. But really, I mean, yes, Black people, Indigenous people, yes, deserve reparations. But there's this term I like, American privilege. We call Western privilege. There needs to be reparations to the entire world. And actually, right, I don't think that means necessarily that the US has to turn itself into a backward society, or the West too, right? That's kind of the fear mongering that the right tries to use as a way to blame others for the maladies of their own economic orders. But at the same time, there's a truth in the sense that we do have to begin to think like we are not superior to others. This is what Putin mentioned about exceptionalism, that we're not superior. And materially, we have to understand that. And I don't think that the economic crisis in Europe is going to help with this, or in the United States. But at the same time, there is this, because of the way imperialism has created uneven developments, to say it nicely, but really massive inequality and exploitation and the division of the world into oppressor and oppressed nations. You have this dynamic where we can't even, as a movement, approach Russia, Putin as equals to our own systems and ways of life, whether we want them or not. We say, if we're anti-capitalist and socialist, we don't even want them. But yet most of the left, especially the Western left, especially even the radical left, would look at this speech and then right away harp on the rhetoric about trans and queer folks. And it's not like I look at that and I say, oh, I love this. But at the same time, a lot of folks would just dismiss everything else as if that history, that combination of racism, neocolonialism, of imperialism, of the Western imperialist world order, of the hypocrisy, the so-called exceptionalism, all of that, dismiss all of that, right? That's the problem that we are facing. The dismissal of that is exactly why we can't address any of these other things, right? Because we are dismissing, as a movement, if we can even call it that, if there is such a thing in the United States and the West, we're dismissing these very important critical points. Really, what I think is it holds the potential to cause these total epical shifts, which will inevitably, whether we like it or not, is going to influence what we're doing in the United States, what we're doing in the West to create the political change that we want to see, to create more progressive socialist societies. Without acknowledging all that Putin said, without the historical memory that Vladimir Putin has of the world historic situation that most in the West do not have, without that, then we're basically fish out of water. We have lost. We are suffocating, and we are going to suffocate under the grips of this declining empire for many years to come. So Putin, believe it or not, can teach us a lot through this speech. And so, I really appreciate all of you sitting with me for this, despite the fact that we did have some problems with the stream tonight. And hopefully I can reschedule with the Duran very soon, very, very, very soon. Okay. I will be in touch with them, hopefully, and we can work this out if there's anything to work out. And yes, but I appreciate you all sticking around. I'm actually going to stick around for another 10 minutes or so, but I need to charge my laptop and take a bit of a break. So I have a new video as well for the Be Right Back card. All right. So I'm going to put that on, and I will be right back in a couple minutes. All right. I am back. Okay, so I'm going to thank the super chats now, and then I'm going to head out. So, the chat is on fire. Oh, wow. All right, so I got to try to thank these super chats. All right, let's do this. Let me start from the bottom to the top. Now we're here. Let me see. Thank you so much. Go Girazilla. Thank you for the super chat, for the generous super chat. Let's see. Oh, wow. Okay, so the chat, I might be missing something. That might have been the middle. Oh, wow. All right. Well, appreciate everyone sticking around. I know that. Let's see. So whatever happened. Okay. I'm not going to get into non. So, of course, the best way to support with the super chats, you can become a member on this channel now. I know I saw someone become a member. I'm going to try to get to you and thank you. So you can do that for $5 a month. And you can support this channel that way. I just opened that up, and I will try to treat you all like my subscribers on Patreon, which is give you early announcements. I don't paywall anything though. All right. So I'll give you early announcements. I will shout you out during streams, but I do not paywall. So that's my philosophy. So I try to just get early announcements, materials up, share with the community first before it goes public. All right. Let's see. Thank you all for the support tonight. David says you don't need to apologize for Putin, Danny. Thank you, David, for the super chat. You're right, I don't. But sometimes I feel like I do with all the vitriol. You know, it's just ridiculous. I mean, there's just no nuance, right? There's no nuance in the United States. It's either it's a lot of hyperbole. So thank you for the super chat, though. That was very generous. David again. Thank you again for the super chat, David. Appreciate it. Felix says it's because of 70 years of socialism that Russia was able to grow its productive forces, making it a superpower that even post-dismember in the 90s can rebuild today and withstand U.S. sanctions. Yes. If it wasn't for the Soviet Union, do we think that Russia would have had the experience of understanding how to nationalize its resources rapidly like it does? No. And that's because of the Soviet Union, what the Soviet Union was able to do. They tried to dismember the Western imperialism tried to dismember the Soviet Union in its entirety, but couldn't do it. It's a process that, while we cannot understate how devastating it was for people, it's a process that takes time. It's a process that takes time. And luckily for Russia, now it's going its own path. And that is very good. That is very important. Even if that path may not be romantic like the Soviet Union, it has a lot of benefits for humanity. And I really just despise anyone who wants to disparage Russia as some kind of like dystopian, nightmare capitalist and imperialist regime, like all these Westerners do, sitting in the belly of the empire. So shameful. Hassan, thank you for this sticker. I appreciate the support. David again with the super sticker. Thank you so much tonight for all of your support. So I already thanked that person. Let's see if there's any more. All right. It's getting late out here, so I'll be heading out very soon. But let me just continue. Let's see if I missed anybody. Very active chat. Oh, there we go again. Let's see. David again with the super sticker. Appreciate all of your support. Incredible. Thank you. And again, Hassan, thank you so much as well for your support tonight. Very much appreciated. David again, great show. Thank you so much. Let's see. Here we go. Fragile says, thank you for the super chat. Tokyo should not be forgotten. Americans burned the city to the ground, and there were more casualties than Hiroshima and Nagasaki altogether. This happened March 9th, 1949. Thank you so much. Yes, Japan. I said, I kind of, glossed over. My apologies. But it is so true. The United States raised Japan, raised Tokyo. That was really the basis of the surrender, right? The Japanese imperial government, its colonial government, couldn't take it anymore. But guess who suffered? It was the people. The people suffered, and more people suffered from that than, of course, the nuclear bombs. So thank you so much for that super chat and that comment. Thank you for spreading that knowledge. Thank you again, David. Appreciate it. I know there's a member out here, so I'm waiting. Thank you, Franny. Appreciate it, Franny. Really do. Thank you so much for supporting this channel. I mean, this channel, we're growing, although the growth can be slow because of the suppression. Thank you again, David, for another super sticker. Wow. Appreciate all the generosity tonight. Again, David, super sticker. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Where's that new member? I know there's a member out here. So I know you're representing for all of the new members that will come onto YouTube. And look, I'm on Rockfin too. I should probably share the stream there in the chat. I will. I'll click OK at the end. But you can also support me over at Rockfin. You can leave tips over at Rockfin as well. David again with the super sticker. I think I'm getting close. Oh, here we go. Nancy, thank you for becoming a member. Wow, my first member. I feel very grateful. So thank you so much. Thank you so much, Nancy, for becoming a member. Of course, the best way is to become a member on Patreon. That I'm trying to build up Patreon again. Patreon is very tough because there's a lot of people who come and go from Patreon, but please do support me on there as well. That's for consistent support. So if you can't give super chats, not everyone can come and give super chats. You're not always going to make every stream. Patreon is the best way. Substack is great too. I love support on Substack. chroniclesofhaiphong.substack.com in the description. Support there is great because you pay one time annually. People can. I think it's better financially usually for people. It's easier. I give, I share all my streams on there, my articles. You can support me on there as well. It's a really great place to support. Much better. I mean, honestly, Patreon, I made Substack because I actually do like Substack better, but I was a little late to the game and my Patreon had already been built up. So I promote that primarily, but yeah, certainly Substack works really well. And then there are other options, one-time options, etc. David, another super sticker. Thank you so much. I think I'm getting close to the time, to the beginning. So yeah, this was a great stream, everyone. Sorry about the mix-up schedule-wise. Generally, this stuff happens. I get it. People are busy. I know the Duran, they're very busy. So I hope that we can sort this out again very soon. Thank you. I don't want to butcher your name, Tunui. Thank you for the super chat. Thank you for really starting off October well. The beginning of the month is hard because it's payday in a lot of these platforms, but you lose a lot of folks, and that does hurt the work. This is one of the things having us kind of gigging it up, us in independent media, is that our income is dependent upon you all. And we understand, I understand the financial and economic situation that people are in this recession. Thanks, David, again. So I don't hold it against people, but yeah, I mean, it creates a level of pressure on all of us. Right. And I don't try to chase algorithms. I try to keep it to the work. Anti-imperialism. Thank you again, David. I see you, Felix. I'm going to thank you at the end. So I try to keep it to the work because, that's what's important, right? Keeping this to the work, to anti-imperialism. That's what I do mostly on this channel now. This channel, The Left Lens, to me, is beginning with anti-imperialism. A lot of people are doing great work in other areas, but for me, I think there's a huge gap in information and in this information war. So that's what I'm here to help produce, an analysis, not just a reporting, but an analysis to bring it all together. So I think that's it for the super chats. I know there's one at the end here, so let me scroll all the way down. Felix, thank you. He's not a communist, but Putin's elder brother was killed as an infant in the siege of Leningrad at 44. He does hate the neo-Nazis. Yes, he does. Yes, this is true about Vladimir Putin. Very true. Thank you. And people are saying thanks that there's only a couple people doing this, me and Ben Norton. And yeah, I mean, I could maybe name a few others who do it to a degree, but with a special emphasis, right? A special emphasis. Because I think there's a discipline part of this, is that yes, we can chase the news. Yes, we can chase what's trending. We can chase the algorithms. We can chase one topic, but then we would be doing a disservice. So, of course, the Ukraine situation is hot. We should be talking about it. But I talk a lot about China, and then I talk about whatever other developments need to be raised to educate. So anyway, folks, it is late tonight. It's a Saturday night. I'm glad I spent it with all of you. It was my wife. She works overnights, so she's out and about. Probably won't be back for the next couple of days, but I will say, be ready. Subscribe to this channel. Hit that notifications bell, because Scott Ritter is coming on October 4th. And I really enjoyed my interview with him last time I interviewed, because his grasp of the war, the Ukraine situation, war in general, the way of war, militarism is great. I mean, from someone from his perspective, from where he came from. Scott Ritter is a very interesting conversation, and be ready October 4th, 9 p.m. Eastern time, 6 p.m. Pacific. You can catch that stream. I will be getting that ready over the next couple of days. So definitely hit the notifications bell, subscribe to the channel, and of course, do what you can do. Here is Rockfin, by the way. I'm sending you the link to the stream for tonight. If if tipping there is better for you, if you like Rockfin better. So yeah. Okay. So yeah. Anyway, thank you so much. I am out of here. Of course, do all that good stuff. Have a good evening or afternoon, morning, wherever you are, and take care. And I'll see you October 4th. Subscribe here, though. I will be clipping up this and other things as well to share on the channel in the interim. See you in a couple days, October 4th, with Scott Ritter. Bye-bye.